We talked very early into as the pandemic was shutting down the economy. One of the things you said you were going to be looking for was how we are with each other. That the fate of this country and a lot of countries goes to how people relate to each other, whether divisions increase or whether we come together, if we do things in a bipartisan nature. It's been maybe 7 months since we talked last. I'm curious if you think that's happening or not.
Well, as I wrote on the LinkedIn pieces, the changing world order, there's a cycle that is repeated over and over again. And there are three factors in that cycle. The first is the money and credits part, produce a lot of debt, monetize it, and the implications of that. That was with us and in the works before, but it got exaggerated. Then there's how we are with each other internally. That means the wealth gap, the values gap, and the political gap for dealing with each other. And history has shown that could lead to civil war. There's a sequence if you have irreconcilable differences. And then there's the third influence, which is the rise of a great power challenging an existing great power. And all of those relate to each other. And then we have the stress test. And so in answer to your question about how we're relating to each other, I think it's now more apparent to probably all of your audience that the answer is that there are irreconcilable differences, that people at both sides, let's call it a lot of the red and the red states and a lot of the blue and the blue states and the parties have greater levels of extremism and actually, want to damage each other. I believe that when the causes people are behind are more important than the system for resolving differences and bringing them together, the system is in jeopardy. So no, it hasn't been good, and it's unlikely to be good. There's a spirit on the Biden administration to say that they do want to do that, but the actual degree of dealing with the irreconcilable differences and the issues that have to be dealt with makes me not very optimistic. I'd like to be optimistic, but it still remains the big thing: how we will deal with each other, and it's a big problem.
Would you say you're less optimistic now than you were even 8 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The path was clear and written down in that book, so everybody, I hope, will read chapters 8 and 9 in your LinkedIn, because you will see the cycles repeat over and over again. And so the path is sort of clear, and one hopes for deviations from that path. But and there's been a bit of a movement in terms of the desired intent. But I really think that what's required is to resolve the differences. And what would be required would be, I think, one of two things. I think that there has to be a reaching that the moderates of each party have got to come together. And that could either happen by, let's say, President Biden bringing into the tent Republicans and doing something like having a Manhattan Project in which everybody agrees that there needs to be a form of restructuring, have smart people, bipartisan, dealing with the changes that are necessary, something like that, a bipartisan, or perhaps the development of a third party where the moderates can come together and so there's choices, because historically the swing power can have a significant effect. But I think right now in each of the parties, the wings of those parties are at risk, and I worry that the moderates will not have a place, because if you look at history, you see that you can't be a moderate. The circumstances get to the point where you have to make a choice, and they say you make a choice, and moderation is perceived as weakness. So that polarity, I think, is likely to increase. But anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Well, I'd love to get your thought on what business's role is here, if at all. We had Carol Tomé, the CEO of UPS, on recently. UPS had taken all their money out of any PACs that supported anyone around the January 6th insurrection. Is there and in the last year, we've seen CEOs and leaders really starting to speak up on topics that they hadn't spoken up on before, really feeling like they need to get drawn into this conversation around division, polarity, racial equality. These are things that business leaders in the past haven't necessarily added their voice to. So on this topic of division, on wealth gaps, what is business's role either in bringing us together or just speaking out about it?
First of all, there's not the only movement comes from kind of threats. When I wasn't much more than a year ago that I wrote the piece on LinkedIn, which was called "Why and How Capitalism Needs to Be Reformed," and that was a very, very controversial piece. And we talked about some of those issues, and then there's been a movement. I remember. When the Business Council and Jamie Dimon made that point that companies should operate this way, that there's been a movement and there's been a movement also to ESG investing and so on, which is a movement sort of in that direction under the pressures of the circumstances. But that won't resolve material differences, and that won't be enough to deal with the circumstances. And I don't know how well it sticks. I mean, I think, what is it even? What is, a company says that they're going to do those better practices and so on, and those are good moves. But really, what is it? At the end of the day, it's almost a matter of to have changes. Almost the question is, what are the rules? What are the laws? And how does that work? And to be able to make those changes along those lines while increasing productivity and agreeing how to do that is key, because I'm not knocking capitalism. I'm a capitalist.
Before we continue, help us by smashing that YouTube like button and subscribe now to this channel. This shows the algorithm that you value the information, and it helps us spread this message. Sharing is caring. Please like and subscribe now. Thank you. And now let's continue.
There's the cycle. I believe in that whole thing, but there's actually an engineering exercise that needs to take place that makes an improvement in productivity at the same time as it makes it for most of the people. And there's not the structural engineering that really is going on. So let's take something, there's so many dimensions to this, but you could take something like robotics and AI and the replacing of people. So it's an innocuous thing. It's a business needs to run its business in the most efficient way. And it's exemplified by COVID. And if you have machines doing the work, they don't get COVID, they don't strike, they don't get upset, they may be a lot cheaper. Well, that's moving in that direction. Okay, so now you run a company, and that direction widens the wealth gap and widens the income gap. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It may be good for productivity, but what that means for a society doesn't have a game plan. Like, what is that going to do? So you need structural changes that are well thought through. And what I'm hearing is, good intentions and a little bit of a move, but it's not really dealing with those types of structural changes.
Actually, I'll be curious to know whether you think it deals with what we're talking about, which is the Robin Hood, GameStop, AMC questions of it's been painted as being the little guys versus the big guys, or rising up against hedge funds, or other people are saying, no, this is just stock manipulation or trying to game the stock market. Do you see this movement as part of the larger whole, as being something bigger than just movement in one stock?
Well, there is what it literally is. And then there's the underlying sentiment of one group sort of thinking that, little guys killing the big guys or something like that. I mean, what it is it's great. When I was a kid, I played in the markets the way they did when I was young, and I didn't have much money. I caddied and I played in the market. And that group of people is getting that experience, and they engineered a short squeeze, and that's great. So it was a short squeeze. And there are issues about, how fast the transactions, and then there are clearinghouse issues and those kinds of things. That's what it really was. But however, it caught everybody's attention, and it became a thing which is, like the little guy bringing down the big guy. Now, America has been great because of little guys bringing down the big guys, meaning you could take Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, I felt in my own way, I started out of a 2-bedroom apartment and there was the big investment firms. And so I relate to American entrepreneurship to bring down the little guys or to out the big guys. I love that spirit. But there is also the almost cheering on the hurting. So it depends what it is, really. If it's, I think that we're in an environment in which you can, almost have it, the taste of blood and the taste of harm, rather than operating within a system where you say, that's part of the system and it evolves. So I think the question is, what's it symptomatic of? Why is it so, what is it in the media? It's almost like a Netflix show that we're going to watch in which throats are going to be slit or something. I don't know if it's symptomatic of that which it looks a bit like that I find symptomatic of the circumstances we're in.
Ray, what do you think of when you look at the what the movement of people from working in offices to being able to work anywhere? How do you think about how that has an impact on some of these divisions? Does it help that you now have people leaving big cities and going to smaller, more affordable towns and bringing their thoughts and beliefs with them? Does it create new bubbles, blue bubbles in red areas? Does it bring us together? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that it's just the tremendous capacity of adaptation. That's humanity's greatest strength, the capacity to adapt and build technologies and so on. And so it evolves. And some people will say it's better and some people will say it's worse. And I don't think I'm wise enough to say, other than I could say in some ways it's better, in some ways it's worse. I think, though, that the migration that you're referring to is due more to the wealth gap differences and the values gap differences. So there is a migration going on from some states to other states. I don't think it's primarily driven by the COVID issue. It's partially driven by taxes, and there's a financial component to it, which is the usual kind of hollowing out component to it, which I'll describe in a second. But it's also driven by differences in values and hospitality. This dynamic of a hollowing out is when you have, this is just a principle, when you have a large wealth gap and a lot of debt, and you have an economic downturn, people are going to be at each other's throats. And we'll have irreconcilable differences, financial and also behavioral. And that leads people then to move. If they have the ability to move, they get up and they move. And that kind of migration is happening. Some people feel places like, Miami, Austin, Texas, and so on, not just for taxes, but for how they should live, whether it's regulatory or am I around people who won't be angry at me and all of that. That kind of thing is going on, and that's going on in a big way. And that, I think, is the big thing. Technologies will adapt, and we will work in different ways. It's an experimentation. It's a learning process because you have it, and then let's say you get rid of the pandemic. Then you have a choice and you've learned something along the way, and there's been developments of technologies, and then we choose. But so that doesn't bother me, but the other one does.
What to do in such a situation? Inform yourself and keep your financial education strong. We from the Compact Group offer our loyal subscribers a free educational portal with firsthand monetary, financial, and economic knowledge. Enter our invite-only Insider Club by clicking the link below. you will get access to first-class information far earlier than the rest. We have prepared a special deal for all our members where you can access a giant pool of Robert Kiyosaki's financial wisdom for just $1. To find out more, simply click the link below and join our Insider Club absolutely free. But there is more you can and should do. Build up several streams of income. More and more people realize that they have to take their future in their own hands, but they don't know how and where to start. We from Compact offer our Insider Club members unique opportunities. Strengthen your financial muscle and get the edge. Click the link below. Become part of our free Insider Club. No financial obligations. But there's one important thing you have to know. You have to become active. So do it now. Become active and see you on the other side.